Assalamualaikum, peace be upon you. My name is Anu Krashin, and on behalf of the Muslim Law Students Association of the University of Ottawa, I would like to welcome you all to this very important event. I first heard about security certificates when I was completing my undergraduate degree in psychology in Calgary, Alberta. However, it wasn't until I had to study this issue in my various law school classes, including constitutional law, immigration law, and administrative law, and meeting some of those personally affected here in Ottawa, that I really came to realize all the problems with the certificate and the ultimate effect that it had on those named under security certificates and their families. Organizing this event came with a unique set of challenges. For instance, I have been made aware that the Department of Justice has been following the event to ensure, for instance, that two security certificate detainees are not in the same room together. Also, since one of Mr. Majoub's many release conditions are that he is not allowed to be underground at any time, I had to scramble to prove that this room here, FTX 147, did not fit the definition of subterranean. Who'd have thought? Before we begin, I just wanted to outline some important points. One is to please save your questions till the end. We will have plenty of time for Q&A. Also, alluding to another one of Mr. Majoub's conditions, is that Mr. Majoub is not allowed to communicate or associate indirectly or directly with anyone who has a criminal record. So I would ask that you please keep this in mind for his sake. We have with us today a panel of experts on the topic of security certificates, and we're also very fortunate to have with us as a moderator Dr. Monia Mazik. Dr. Monia Mazik is probably best known for courageously campaigning to free her husband, Maher Arar, from the torture that he was suffering in the Syrian prison. She was also the NDP candidate for the riding of Ottawa South in the 2004 federal election. Dr. Mazik has been a tireless social justice activist and has been honored many times for her efforts in fighting for human rights and justice. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Monia Mazik.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for your introduction. And I would like, before starting, I would like to thank the Muslim Law Student Association for organizing such an event at the University of Ottawa. Despite all the struggle or little obstacles you encounter. And I think that's explained very well, that gives us a pre-taste of how the life of the private security man is, which is a very little example compared to what they live every day in their strict condition imposed by the law. This evening, we are very fortunate to have a great panel. I think we have different perspectives to understand the topic. And of course the topic, as you know, as Anna has just introduced it, is going to be the security certificate. The security certificate, not a lot of Canadians know about that, and I think again, you are fortunate because many of you are studying law, so, but it would be also interesting to, once you are out of this gathering, go back and tell about your friends, about your neighbor, about your family, about this process, because this is something horrible happening in our country, and I'm still puzzled how we still keep that process so far. So what is it briefly? I'm not going here to speak a lot about it in just a few minutes of the time, because we had experts to examine the topic in detail. So it's a mechanism by which Canadian government can detain or deport non-citizens, so usually refugees or permanent residents, and who are deemed a threat to national security. What makes the security certificate controversial is that they allow for indefinite detention. When they were first, like when the government started using that, their idea and the rationale behind them was to get this to label someone national security and make it as fast as possible and deport them. However, what we ended up with, it's not the case because most of the people accused of, or that they were targeted by security certificate tried to fight back, and then that leads to indefinite detention. All this, it's without charge, we don't know the evidence, it's secret evidence, which means that neither of the accused nor of their lawyers can see the evidence against them. So in some cases, the evidence relied on substantiates on torture, and we know that. CSIS acknowledged that recently, that they use it, and still, this is a process that is still being used and make people suffer every day. So they were, in the past years, there were 5 men, and as if it was a coincidence, all these 5 men are Arab Muslims, and they were arrested and detained through security certificate. Mohammed Harkat, who lives here in Ottawa, and we are fortunate because we have his wife here, Sophie Harkat, who is a tireless campaigner for her husband, but also, I guess, for against the security certificate and for human rights. And then we have Mahmoud Jabala, he's in Toronto. We have Mohammed Zaki Mahshoud, he's with us this evening. And we have also Hassan Al-Mar'i, he's in Toronto, and Charkaoui, he's from Montreal. So all these 5 men were targeted in the past years with security certificates. There was a very important Supreme Court judgment a few years ago, I think in 2007. That's Charkaoui versus against the government of Canada, where security certificates were held to be unconstitutional. So we thought that that was the end of it, but unfortunately it's not the case because the Supreme Court ordered the Canadian government to reform or to remodel the security certificate. Personally, I think the new system is security certificate light because it's still the same thing, but they made it more politically accepted, or at least that make it look in a better way. And I'm not going to go into the process. I think I'll leave it to legal experts to explain what has really changed and what did not. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just introduce our panel participants, and I think once you hear from them, the floor will be open to your question. We are, again, pleased to have, as I said, very talented person and, person who can tell you from personal experience about security certificates. So we'll start with Mr. Leo Russo-Mano, and I'll introduce him. Mr. Russo-Mano is a graduate of the University of Ottawa, and he holds a master's degree in international politics from Carleton University. Since his call to the bar, Leo has had an extensive trial practice in the Superior Court of Justice and the Ontario Court of Justice. He has represented individuals charged with various crimes, including some recent landmark cases on police brutality. He has authored articles on the exclusions of firearms as well as the power of citizens' arrest, and has presented his papers at criminal law conferences. Leo Russo-Mano is currently part of the legal team of Mohammed Harkat. And not far from him, there is the wife of Mohammed Harkat, Sophie Harkat. She's currently a graduate student in the public and media relations. I'm sure that she's going to finish that very, very quickly with honors. I'm quite sure, because if you don't know Sophie, she's been on the media since Mohammed's arrest.
They graduated with top honors.
Okay. So you see, I'm not wrong. So she became a human rights activist overnight after her husband, Mohammed Harkat, was arrested under security certificate. That was in December 2002, and the irony of that, it was the day of International Human Rights Day. That's right? Yeah, I remember that very well. My husband was still in prison at that time. And she has been advocating tirelessly for justice since then. Sophie has traveled extensively across all Canada, and she went to the UK to talk about security certificates. She has discussed her husband's case with hundreds of reporters from around the world. She has been a guest speaker at various universities, conferences for the past 10 years. This is the good part of it. But the bad part of it, and I think Sophie can tell you more about that, because she was officially like a jailer for her husband at home as well. And this is the other side of the medal. I couldn't say medal, but I think it's the other side of the story, because she has been also basically controlling and named unofficially like a jailer for her husband. So with all the personal consequences that can create in a couple life. In 2004, she was given a Human Rights Award by the Canadian Council on American Islamic Relations, Fair Canada. And then near Sophie, we have the pleasure to welcome Barbara Jackman. And Barbara Jackman was called to the bar of Ontario in 1978. From then on, the primary focus of her practice has been immigration and refugee law and related constitutional litigation. Ms. Jackman has acted on behalf of clients or interveners in a number of the leading chapters of right cases concerning immigration, refugee matters before the Supreme Court of Canada, including arguing as counsel for the defendant Hassan al-Marai in Charkaoui versus the government. So she is one of the counsel, not the counsel for one of the security certificate in the Charkaoui. And I'm not going to mention, I mean, Barbara Jackman is very much known in her field, and she has been really on different inquiry, like in Charkaoui Commission inquiry. She has been the Arar inquiry, and she has been also before the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration of the House of Commons of Canada. So she is a very well-known lawyer that worked tirelessly for the to prove, to make the rights of these people prevail. And then we have Mohammed Zaki Mahjoub. He is one of the person of these 5 men who have been targeted with the security certificate. Mohammed Zaki Mahjoub was accepted as a refugee into Canada in 1996. In 2000, he was arrested under security certificate. He has been living under certificate in Canada since then. So since 2000 till now, with this, so for all 12 years. He spent 8 years in prison, 3 of them in Kingston Immigration Public Center, also known as Guantanamo North by activists. Mr. Mahjoub has never been formally charged since the Supreme Court threw out his first security certificate as unconstitutional in 2007. He has been in pre-trial detention under house arrest with some of the strictest conditions in Canadian history. Earlier this year, when he was finally permitted to travel outside Toronto, he completed a 7-city speaking tour across Ontario to raise awareness about his story and about the issue of security certificate. And finally, I hope we will welcome another lawyer. His name is Yavar Hamid, but he's not here yet. I've heard from the organizers that he is on his way. Yavar was called to the Ontario Bar in 2001. He completed his common law degree at the University of Ottawa, Master of International Affairs at Carleton University. Yavar practice focused on the protection and advocacy of human rights, civil liberties in a diverse range of legal area, including constitutional litigation, administrative law, criminal law, and immigration law. Currently, Ayabar teaches at a course in Carleton University's Department of Law entitled State Security and Dissent, and he acts as counsel for security certificate detainee Mohammed Zaki Mahjoub. He was also very well known when he successfully repatriated Abu Sufyan Abdulrazib. He is the Canadian Sudanese who was kept in Sudan, and the Canadian government even confident that Yamar Khamis was the lawyer, one of the lawyers who worked on his behalf and was successful in bringing him to Canada. So that's all what I have to say about our panel. Once again, I'm thrilled to have you all, but also to have this wonderful panel, and we are going to hear from them. Thank you very much. So, yeah, we can start with Leo.
I think I'm up first. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for having me here today. I'm also very honored to be on this panel, along with not only the panelists, but also Dr. Mastin. It's very, very nice to be here with everyone, and it's really a testament to people's interest and really the importance of this topic, that there are so many students and other interested people here on a Friday evening, after I'm sure what was a long week for many of you, including me. Really just to give you a brief background, I wanted to talk a little bit about my own experience working on the case of Mr. Harkat and where we are here, because we've basically we're in our second go-round with the case of Mr. Harkat, and to sort of bring it all back with where we are today with national security and the law. First of all, I should say that I work along with some two senior lawyers, Matt Weber and Norm Boxall, on the case, and we all come from a criminal law background, and I think one of the ideas behind us being hired to take on the case, and I'm sure that Sophie can verify this, it was that we had a criminal background litigating criminal law issues where the liberty interests of our clients at stake is something that we're very often used to arguing on behalf of people whose life is literally on the line. And nowhere is that more pronounced than in the case of security certificate detainees, where not only they face the prospect of indefinite detention, but in the case of Mohammed and most of the others, if not all of them, the very real possibility of being deported to a place where they would be tortured. It was not only with the experience having these kind of interests or advocating on behalf of clients with these kinds of interests, but also courtroom experience that criminal lawyers bring. And one of the things that, as a criminal lawyer, we took for granted as criminal lawyers was the adversarial process. This idea that you have two opposite sides who are equally equipped to argue, and with a neutral arbiter who would be able to come to a just decision. Not only equality of arms per se, but also the idea that there would be procedural protections in place that would protect the person from being unjustly accused or being sent somewhere where they could be tortured, as in the case of Mr. Harkat. But with all of that experience, nothing would really equip us for what we would be facing. And I started working on this case in 2007, or actually 2006, when I was a second-year law student studying criminal law. And that was really the first go-around of the security certificate proceeding, the reasonableness hearing, as they call it. Eventually that certificate would be upheld. And we eventually challenged the legislation all the way up until, all the way up to the Supreme Court of Canada, where we went along with Charkaoui as well as Almeray before the Supreme Court of Canada. And were successful in convincing the court that the process as it then stood was unconstitutional. And it was unconstitutional because it deprived the detainees of the right to a fair judicial process. And that's really an important principle, if not one of the most important principles that you can have in a legal system, to be entitled to a fair process. One of the inherent problems with the security certificate regime back then, and as I do think, still persists today, is that the detainee and his counsel are not properly equipped with the means by which to challenge the evidence. The evidence that the ministers are relying on to try to establish the person's links as a national security threat are secretive in nature. And this is something which is endemic to most, if not all, national security type hearings. So that was one of the things that we managed to successfully challenge, and really what we were able to argue was that because there were systems in other parts of the world, namely in the United Kingdom with special advocates who had security clearance, who were able to see the secret evidence and able to cross-examine witnesses and challenge the evidence, that the minimal impairment branch of the Section 1 Oakes test was not satisfied. And the government argued very vigorously to suggest that Section 7 was not breached at all, and thankfully we were successful with the help not only of the council on behalf of Mr. Almeray and Mr. Charkaoui, but also numerous interveners on behalf of human rights organizations that were able to help us marshal an argument together. One of the things that's important, though, as Dr. Mazzi calls it, security certificate light. I really like that term. I think it's very applicable to what we have today, because they've introduced special advocates. But I can tell you right now, having been on this case for almost 7 years, that we as public counsel for Mr. Harkat still don't know what the basis of the allegations are against him. As a criminal lawyer, I have experience defending criminal cases involving terrorism. One case that I'm doing right now, which includes over 300,000 pages of disclosure. And this case doesn't even come close to a fraction of that in terms of what's been disclosed to us, the kinds of evidence they're relying on. By way of a quick example, in this case, the government is alleging that Mohammed made several incriminating statements on recorded telephone calls. Well, CSIS had a policy in place to destroy every single recording, original recording of every telephone call. Not only the recordings, but the notes of those recordings. And now they purport to rely on those conversations to suggest that Mohammed had links to terrorism. And I can tell you that in a criminal process, that just simply wouldn't fly. The procedural protections that are in place in a criminal process, where the liberty interest is arguably less than that of someone subjected to a security certificate, those guarantees are well in place in a criminal process. But in this security certificate light that we have here, those protections are still very much up in the air. We are trying to appeal that to the Supreme Court of Canada, this issue, because we attempted to have those conversations excluded under Section 7 of the Charter, and the trial court rejected our application, and that decision was partially overturned by the Federal Court of Appeals. So there appears to be some glimmer of hope there on that issue, which both sides are now seeking leave to appeal at the Supreme Court of Canada. So that decision, seeking leave to appeal from the Supreme Court of Canada, is still outstanding. Some of the other issues that we've run into in Mohammed's case, which are simply not present in a criminal case in which the liberty interest is also at stake, is reliance on confidential informants. The criminal trial is no stranger to reliance on confidential informants. Police officers rely extensively on confidential informants, for example, to uphold the reasonableness of a search. But when police officers purport to rely directly on the evidence of a confidential informant, the rules, their charter rights of the accused individual demand that that confidential informant be called as a witness. There's a reason in the adversarial system why we have live witnesses in court, because what is often on paper isn't as it seems when a live witness hits the witness stand and is subject to cross-examination. You know, cross-examination is often described as the single most powerful tool of truth-seeking in our legal system. And we are strapped in the security certificate process. We are forced to fight for Mohammed's rights with both hands tied behind our backs, because there is not one live witness called in the public hearings, not one live witness with any direct knowledge of the case. We were in court for months and months, and were not able to cross-examine even one witness that had direct knowledge of the case. And the confidential informants in Mohammed's case actually were tested with polygraphs, failed. One of them failed the polygraph, and that fact was hidden from us for I don't even know how long, but CSIS kept that information from us. And when it finally came to light that one of these informants had failed a polygraph exam, the special advocates in our case actually sought to cross-examine those confidential informants and were denied. So you not only have the problem of these witnesses clearly having lied, but then not being allowed to cross-examine them in camera, in secret. That's what the special advocates are supposed to be there for, to protect Mohammed's interests in secret where public counsel are not able to. And even in a closed room, the court held that we didn't have the right of cross-examination. And to us, that's just the height of unfairness, not being able to test that evidence. Because as criminal lawyers, or as all lawyers experience, every trial begins on paper. The trial process always begins with disclosure on paper. But once you hit the courtroom and witnesses take the stand, then it becomes a completely dynamic setting where anything can change. And any trial lawyer with any experience will be able to tell you stories about how something which seemed to go one way based on paper went completely a different direction once a witness took the stand and was subject to cross-examination. Because cross-examination is really our stock and trade. So to be deprived of that right in security certificate cases where these men are facing deportation to torture is the height of unfairness in my opinion. You know, with 5 years later, since the Charkaoui decision at the Supreme Court, how well are security certificates doing? We have the case of Charkaoui, who had his security certificate dismissed when the court ordered the government to disclose certain information that they refused to disclose. We have the case of Almray, where the security certificate was quashed. And now we have the three, Majub, Jabala, and Harkat, who are left. And us for Harkat, we're basically the furthest along, and we've had several of these problems, which are also seen in the other two cases. So how well is the security certificate process working? I think the record speaks for itself. So thank you for allowing me to speak to you guys.
Well, good evening, everyone. I would like to thank first Amna and the organizing committee for putting this event together. I'm also very flattered to be presented as an expert. I guess after 10 years, I am an expert now on the subject, especially on the personal level. I'm also very flattered that Mrs. Monia Mazig is here today because she's been a very good advocate and a very good friend. And she has been there to raise the level of awareness on security certificates, so she has been a tremendous help to make sure that we get coverage and all that. And since it's been such a long time for us, we're in our 10th year, Leo has become a lawyer, and I've known Barb seems like ages, what seems like ages, and I think it's fair to say that Barb is one of the best immigration lawyers in the country. And it's a pleasure for me to be on the same panel as Mr. Majub. I think this is actually the first time that we get to speak on a panel together. And I'm actually a little bit annoyed because I'm the one whose husband received a letter yesterday to make sure that he wouldn't be attending this event because it would violate Section 9 of his bail conditions, which is He cannot associate with a person that he knows or ought to know has a criminal record or is a threat to national security. Now, I don't want to point any fingers here, but that could be any of us at any time, right? So, my husband was arrested on December 10th of 2002, and this year is our 10th anniversary. And people come up to me still after 10 years, and they've come up to me many, many times and say, why do you defend your husband? Why do you this? And I've even had some people asking me why I just don't let him go, and why don't you just deport him and move on with your life, and these kind of things. And I think it's fair to say that if any one of you would be in my husband's shoes or my shoes, you would fight the process. I know most of you are studying law, but I know some of you may have doubts on some of these cases or the process or whatever. But it's important to remember that if you were in my husband's shoes or Mr. Majoub's shoes and you are detained without charge, without access to the evidence, especially after all the mistakes that CISAs have made the past couple of years, would you defend yourself? Would you fight for your life? And I think it's fair to say that everyone here would. At the same time, I also believe in my husband's innocence more than ever, but that's important to me, and I also believe in the principle of justice. I also think my husband is really cute, and I want him to stick around. My motto has been, if you're in my husband's shoes and all that, my mom's motto for the past 10 years has been, ooh, you probably have the wrong guy, but boy, do you have the wrong woman that comes along with it. After my husband was arrested, he was giving a summary of allegations, which was about 14 pages long. I think I'll skip a lot of the legal questions because those are stuff that Leo can answer during the question period, but about 14 pages of summary, and every sentence starts with, we assume, we believe, we think that in the past, present, or future, Mr. Harkat may be associated with terrorism, may be associated with this individual, but then again, that could be any of us at any time, right? And for example, when the second allegation report was reissued in February of 2008, the government had 1 year to redraft the new law. On the Friday night of the 1 year deadline at 4:55 p.m., 5 minutes before the deadline, the end of the day, which was on a Friday, and we had an outing schedule, they delivered the new certificate, 5 minutes to the deadline. The certificate, is only 5 men at the time, is issued to the wrong detainee. The certificate is issued to Hassan Hamri, who actually won his certificate a few years ago, and there's only 5 of them. And then my husband is expected to sign this to say, here is your new allegation report. Nothing new in there, but it's like, I think this time was like 135 pages long. There was not new allegation, it was new interpretation of the old allegations. That's what it was in the report. But there's only 5 men, and my husband gets the wrong certificate issued to him, the wrong cover letter. Imagine what kind of mistake they make in the background if your cover letter is not even addressed to the right individual. So my husband, when he was arrested, he was thrown in jail. A lot of you, I don't know if you've thinking of becoming criminal lawyers or whatever, but I think Leo and anybody here on the panel will tell you that it's certainly not what you see in the movies. Especially not if you're not detained in a provincial detention center, which is for people that are 2 years less 1 day, or that are being transferred to a penitentiary later on. But I think it's fair to say that my husband and Mr. Majoub is probably one of the longest inmates in a provincial detention center in the history of this country, as well as Mr. Jabala. First, he's thrown in jail and didn't give him a toothbrush for the first 10 days. He didn't walk outside for the first 6 months. He didn't look at the sky. He had nothing to read for 6 months until I said, that's enough. You need to at least give him a Quran. They hadn't even given him a Quran. He was in his cell in segregation for a full year without no reading material. I wouldn't see him for weeks at a time. And we'd hear from him on the phone as well, because he only got the phone whenever they felt like it. He had 1 shower a week, and he did not shave for a month to the point where he looked like Bin Laden. And remember, we were just scheduled to go to court, and I went to see him, and he had a really, really long beard, and he said to me, you know, it really bothers me because my mustache goes over my lip and it goes into my food. So I feel like it's gross. And I said, well, you look like Bin Laden, you can't go to court like that either. So everybody who knows my husband is really clean shaven and everything. And so I had a fit in that little glass box that he puts you in when you go see someone in segregation, which is, by the way, in my husband's situation, you're handcuffed from the wrists to the waist, to the waist, to the ankles. And during the visit, he has to hold the phone like this. You're behind a plexiglass, which is dirty. I went to visit Mr. Jabala many years ago, and there were cockroaches on the walls of the Toronto jail where they were detained. You have no human contact whatsoever, and it's like in the movies. I don't know if you've ever seen that Shower Fantastic ad where the mother and the daughter are across the window. Oh, I don't know when I'm going to see you again. And their hands are like that through the window. And that for me was a perfect representation of what it was to say goodbye in a jail when you say goodbye to your husband. But anyways, I was 3.5 years visiting my husband in a glass box. And every time you go in, he's all the way down at the end. And like I said, it was disgusting, it was hot, it was... Oh, just don't end up in there. That's all I'm saying. If you don't have to, just don't end up in there. And very painful. And my husband always said, don't panic or don't say anything because he pays the consequences in the back if you say something to the guards or if you're rude or whatever. They can cancel your visit whenever they want. One morning I was on front page of the Ottawa Citizen and the Ottawa Sun for a protest that we had. Actually, Yavar is one of the activists who first stood up against security certificate. I met him at my first protest 10 years ago in March of 2003. And we were at that protest at the jail, and the next morning we were on the front page of all the newspapers that we were holding this protest to take my husband out of segregation. The next morning I went in for my visit, and the security guard is whispering behind the window, and he calls his supervisor and says, Mrs. Harkat is here, should she get her visit? I was like, what's the problem here? They put me through an x-ray machine. Nobody else in the visitation room had to go through that, just me because I'm on front page of the newspaper. But just to say that the treatment from I'm sure some of you have heard also the recent news about the women who gave birth in the detention center recently. Well, that's the kind of treatment you get in that place. And even you as a citizen, I am not an inmate, you get badly treated. You get treated like crap. And there's no other way of putting it. You're like not even considered a human being in most cases. And just to go over the story where when he was wanting him to shave, I had to fit in that little glass box, and Mo was saying, please don't say anything, otherwise I'm gonna pay the price in the back. And the guard said to me, please get up, Mrs. Harkat. I said to go. I said, I'm not going. You're gonna give him a razor. He said, I said, go. And I said, I'm not going. And he told me, I don't know, about 5 times, this is your last warning. You go now. And I said, I'll go when I'm told that my husband's gonna get a razor. He finally got a razor, a little woman shaver. That evening, I think it took him 5 hours to shave that beard off, just to prove how thick it was. And after that, every time I made phone calls to the jail, it seems like my husband was getting better treatment because I was taking this extremely seriously. Like I said, we only had 2 visits of 20 minutes, and you see some of the movies with the inmates in the back smoking and all that. Well, none of it happens in a provincial detention center. You're in your cell most of the day, a very small cell. My husband was then later transferred to maximum security, where you're with the toughest criminals. There's some really tough criminals in there, but I've also realized there's a lot of innocent people in jail, and not to judge inmates, because they were very, very kind to my husband the entire time that my husband was there. And then my husband was transferred to the facility, what we call Guantanamo North in Kingston, which is a facility that was built specifically for detainees, security certificate detainees, that cost $2.5 million to build, which is, in other words, a portable unit surrounded by 3 sets of barbed wire, which Mr. Majou spent years and years there. My husband was only there for a few weeks when he was granted bail, and then the government tried to appeal the bail, so thankfully I didn't have to go there very long. But when they did the transfer, it was just like Omar Khadr. In total secrecy, they picked up my husband in a small plane, propeller plane, and they transferred him surrounded by guards. It was done early in the morning, so nobody knew that the transfer was being done because nobody had ever seen the detention center. The media wanted access to it, nobody had access to it. It was at the end of the penitentiary. If you visit Kingston Penitentiary, it's all the way at the back. And so when I got a call from an inmate one day, a call saying, your husband went for a visit and he never came back. I said, never came back, because you always live with the fear that your husband could be deported, or you don't know what's going to happen because the government likes to play tricks on you, and they like to keep things secretive and away from the public, and they don't want the truth to come out. But one thing I think all of the men defending themselves on security certificates are not afraid of. It's for the truth to come out, and we want the truth to come out. That's exactly what we want. And in 2005, my husband lost his first certificate, and that was a traumatic experience. One of the things that the government claims my husband is a sleeper agent, and I think it would be better for Leo to explain all the experts we had around this issue. But according to the expert at the government and that all of us produced, my husband was the only sleeper agent ever to enter this country. Ever. And my husband was the only, according to the government, sleeper agent who willingly gave his passport when he came to Canada, the fake passport and the real passport. Because that's the thing the media plays a lot around, is that my husband came in with a fake passport. Well, I'm sorry, but immigrants don't come in this country with real documentation. Most of them don't come in with real documentation. And I think Barb has statistics on that. I think it's more than 80% of refugee immigrants that don't come to this country with the real ID. And my husband actually handed over his papers and said, this is my fake passport, this is my real passport. And they've used that constantly in the media. So if you read the media, obviously you don't always believe what you see. But personally, for my husband, the one thing my husband never had time to do when I met him was sleep, because he was working 3 jobs. 2 gas stations, he was delivering pizza till 2 in the morning. It's important to mention that these men face deportation. They face serious risk of torture, death, imprisonment in very dangerous countries. My husband's from Algeria, Mr. Majoub is from Egypt, Mr. Jabala as well, Hassan is from Syria, and Charkaoui is from Morocco. Now, just to go over quickly about what has been my life for the past couple of years. Thankfully, it changed in September of 2009, mysteriously, when the government claimed that my husband was not as much of a threat. But I became a jailer. I became a full-time guard for 3.5 years to my husband. The day he was released on bail was like, wow. And then he's released, and then you realize, what the hell? What the hell is wrong with this country? I don't know how many times my husband said, I'll go back to jail, which Mr. Majoub did, and he'll tell you his story. I don't know how many times my husband offered to go back because it was way too painful for me, way too painful for the family, because we were all in jail for 3.5 years. My husband still to this day wears a GPS bracelet around his ankle 7 days a week, which he has to charge 2 hours a day. And my husband could never be left alone, whether outside the house or inside the house, and we were only allowed on the property for many months. We were not allowed to go into our backyard. Just to give you an example, if we're having a barbecue and my husband wants to barbecue, I have to step out with him at the same time and step in the house at the same time. We had surveillance cameras at every entrance of the house. We had two outings, a maximum of 3 outings a week for a maximum of 4 hours. Every location has to be pre-approved. Every person you speak to, every person that you think you will speak to has to be pre-approved. You have to provide your background to make sure you don't have a criminal record. Every location, every Tim Hortons, every grocery store, if you forget to put something on the list, I'm sorry, but you cannot go to that location during those outings. During those outings, you're followed by CBSA officers, Community Border Service Agency, who follow you with weapons, bulletproof vests, sometimes 2, sometimes 4, sometimes 6. They follow you around and to make sure that you don't breach conditions. I am his supervising surety. I'm one of 3 that can be with him at all times, 24 hours a day, and I'm being watched to do my job as well. Like I said, no visitors should come in our residence without being pre-approved. The mail was intercepted, the phone was listened to. They even tried to use a phone conversation I had with my own sister to incriminate my own mother because she hadn't paid her taxes, to prove that she could be a good surety because she couldn't put that $50,000 down just in case my husband breached his condition. But they had used the conversation against my mom that my sister had, or what we thought was a private conversation, but obviously was monitored. It's really difficult to try to tie up everything in 15 minutes when you've been going through this for 10 years. But up to now, my husband cannot have access to a cell phone. I cannot have a cell phone. My computer's on the lock. He does not have access to the internet. So if somebody gives me a BlackBerry, I'm like the dinosaur. I have no idea what that thing is. I don't know what it does. Joe lended me her BlackBerry the other day, and I press one button. I'm totally lost. I'm like a dinosaur. I have my computer in my house, but it's under lock and key, and I don't know to do half the things. We had a curfew, we had boundaries within the city. My husband was not allowed to have a weapon, not even a water gun, not even a nail gun, not even a Nintendo gun. Just to give you an example, when we went out on outings, which were pre-approved, at least 40 to 96 hours in advance, we could not use a public washroom because I cannot leave my husband for not even 5 seconds. So if we're doing an outing and I have to go or he has to go, we either had to drive back home, or I had to sneak him in the family bathroom, I had to sneak him in the women's bathroom, or I had to go in the men's bathroom, which don't want to discuss. Have to do things you have to do things that you really don't want to do. Now the thing is, I can't go for a physical and medical appointment without bringing my husband. The doctor has to be pre-approved, the location has to be pre-approved to get a gynecology appointment. And my husband's sitting in the corner, the doctor says, we don't normally allow husbands to go past this point. Well, in my case, it will have to happen. You know, because my husband I cannot leave him alone in the waiting room, and he has to sit in the corner reading one of those big medical magazines, which I know he doesn't understand half of what's in there, but that's what we have to go through. Even a ladies' room. First outing my husband went out, we went to see Stomp at the National Arts Center. The committee paid for tickets, and we had went to the restaurant, everything is pre-approved. Well, the Canadian Border Service Agency sat in the third row, looked at the show, went to see movies. They sat behind us. They really enjoyed Good Cop, Bad Cop. I know they really enjoyed themselves on that one. I went to Costco. You know, there's little samples on weekends? They eat all the little samples. We go to Tim Hortons. They go for a coffee. We go for shawarma. They go for shawarma. We go for grocery. They squeeze the melon. And they pretend they're doing some kind of grocery, but they're like 2 feet away from your face. One time I complained about the distance. He says, well, you don't have a personal space anymore. I'm a Canadian citizen. And I have to say, I forgot to mention that when my husband was arrested, I am the only white wife. It's fair to say I'm French-Canadian, I'm not Quebecer, I'm Franco-Ontarian, because that's how the media portrays me. But that's just a detail. But all the other women wear hijabs or niqab. And the government, not the government, but that's how I was portrayed in the media. And that's how Canadians saw me. Oh, that poor little white woman. She's so naive. And she's being, you know, put to that situation, and he's lying to her. And I'm sorry, you're lying to yourself. The ones who are lying are the government. And that's the fact. My husband was denied attendance to his own 40th birthday party. It's just that this is like the most interesting fact. 40th birthday party a couple years ago when he turned 40, because everything had been pre-approved. We had over 80 guests that were pre-approved, a pre-approved location, and everything was pre-approved. But he was denied attendance because it was a political event where there was going to be a microphone and some speeches. So he was denied that. And I'll just mention 2 more things before I switch over to Bart. I don't think Bart's going to mind. The one talk my husband actually, I dragged him to a talk at the University of Ottawa a couple of years ago, was in criminology class for one of my good friends. Obviously, he's not here tonight. He doesn't come to any of the public events unless they're organized by our committee. He's very picky, and he wants to move on with his life. He's a very simple guy. He doesn't like the attention and all that. But I brought him to a law class a couple of years ago, criminology class. And the understanding was that CBSE would come and look at the room and all that, and I would leave the room while I was giving my talk, right? Because most of my bitching is against CBSA. So they sent 4 officers to check out the room. They noticed there's a computer screen in the room, and that I'm using one of my chips. I don't even know the proper names. USB to put my presentation. And so there was a computer in the room, so they never left the damn room. They sat in the back, all 4 of them, taking notes of everything that I said. At one point, one of the students asked me, "Are you being watched right now?" I said, "I'm sorry, I'm not able to identify them. Because I was told many times by the judge in my testimony that I cannot point the finger in their direction because it jeopardizes their own security." So I said, well, it's for you to know, it's for me to know and you to find out. Next thing you know, all the people are looking in the back like that with the 4 CBSA with the big bulletproof vest and the guns that don't look like criminology students. And next thing you know, everybody's nudging everybody. There they are. I will wrap up on one of the last bad experiences that I've had before the condition changed mysteriously in 2009. My husband and I, on a pre-approved outing, we only had 4 hours. And I have to bring him home before the deadline of the 4 hours. We went to a Shoppers Drug Mart to buy some coffee on sale. And while we're at the cash paying, and I have the receipts in my hand, there is a burglary. And the Shoppers Drug Mart is locked down. The police surround the building, and we're locked in the Shoppers Drug Mart. I only have 15 minutes to get home. And I know that as a supervisor, surely, right, it's my duty to make sure he gets home so he doesn't breach his condition. So I go over to the officer and explain, listen, I need to get my husband out. By the way, your CMP, the OBP, the whatever police, they type in my husband's name. There's absolutely nothing under his name. He doesn't have a criminal record. He's never done anything wrong. So I say, I can give you my piece of ID and all that. If you don't mind, we'll have to leave because he's on bail. And they're like, bail, conditions, right? And he's got a bracelet. No. They're not familiar with any of it, right? Because it's probably the only case in Ottawa that wears a GPS except for Hassan Dia. So just as I'm about to get myself out of that situation and get ourselves home, the CBSC officers manage to go inside the shopping drug mart, and they're wearing again their bulletproof vests and their guns and all that. And they come up to me and say, we're with them, we're with them. I say, you know what, me? I'm a Canadian citizen, I'm in the shopping drug mart, and I have every right to be here. So the police officer doesn't understand why I'm panicking and why I'm so upset and why I'm swearing like crazy, because I've been on these conditions for 3.5 years and I can't take it anymore, and I am fed up. Fed up, and we're going for a bail review the following week. So they said, Sophie, don't panic, it's a exceptional circumstance. I said, exceptional circumstance? You know how many times you use that against us and you want to let my husband back in jail because he went on a yellow light? Or because you think that he's breached a condition, or you create conditions in your head that he thought he breached? I'm sorry, but I don't trust you, and I'm going to get myself out of this situation. So the CBSC officer shows his badge to the Ottawa police and say, we're the CBSA. The police officer says to his supervisor, CBSA? We're the Canadian Border Service Agency? The police and the supervisor look at each other. No, what kind of badge is that? We're at the borders, man, we're at the borders. So the guy doesn't understand, what the hell are border officers doing in the shopping drug mart? And that was my life for 3.5 years. Now the conditions are much lighter, but unfortunately, like tonight is a perfect example of how we live under constant threat, how we're dehumanized, degraded. I mean, your name, everything is, your reputation is like, everything is put aside when you're called a presumed terrorist and you guys in the government. But it's really important to remember in our case, the main informant failed a lie detector test. The evidence comes from torture. They raided our house on the eve of a trial with 16 CBS officers, 3 OPP, 2 police, 2 RCMP, and 3 sniffing dogs to look for so-called evidence. While our house is the most surveilled house, probably more than the Prime Minister of Canada. Conditions are tougher. And that they listen to solicitor client calls. And they've done that for years, so they know everything. But that's just some of the examples that we might have forgot to mention. But it's very important that after tonight, after what you hear, I hope you will take a stand. Some of you, these people eventually will need someone to take over. We need more human rights lawyers. We need good lawyers, because if you don't take a stand for this, it will happen to somebody else. Thank you.
So now you understand why she graduated from public and media and public affairs.
When I got the biggest PR job in the world.
Exactly. Well, I think what Sophie just said, I mean, beyond all the, maybe I think she was more portraying this as a caricature of what her life can be, and it can be funny, but I can understand also behind this irony. I think there is a lot of bitterness and there is a lot of suffering, and I'm very...
Are we bitter for you?
Well, what can you call someone?
I'm very bitter.
Yeah, no, but I think she can turn the bitterness into jokes, and that's what keeps her going. Anyway, now we have the pleasure to have Barbara Jackman, and by the way, we just also get one of our speakers, Mr. Yabar Hamid, who just joined us. So, Barbara, please go ahead.
It's nice to be on a panel with both Sophie and Mr. Majou. Mr. Majou was my client as well for a number of years. I think that it's important for it's important for you, especially those of you who are going to be lawyers, to realize that lawyers can't speak for the people who are actually suffering. I mean, we can make arguments in court, but Sophie says Sophie has turned her bitterness into humor. That's the kind of black gallows humor that you get from people in jail as well. It is painful to listen to Sophie talk, and I know it will be painful to listen to Mr. Majou talk. I'm surprised that they haven't suffered post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms as a result of the treatment that they've received at the hands of the government. I just want to try and briefly put this in context. When I first started practicing, which was before most of you were born, there in the 70s, there was no security process whatsoever. So my clients, mostly Chileans and then later Central Americans, weren't even told what section of the Immigration Act was engaged in relation to the security concerns. We had no access to anything. The RCMP was then the security service, and they engaged in really dirty tricks like burning barns and trying to blame it on the anarchists and a lot of other stuff. It led to a commission to investigate how to deal with security matters and how the security service should behave. And as a result, we got CSIS, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, a civilian agency. And at the same time, we got a process before the Security Intelligence Review Committee to have them assess national security cases for people seeking immigration status or citizenship. That process was given, and I'm going to draw conclusions about what I think about the process at the end of the day, but at the time it was the fairest process we had. It was one where we actually got some reasons secret evidence and expurgated transcripts. We were allowed to cross-examine officers. There was an independent counsel. In '92 it was passed to the federal court and we got nothing. We got no transcripts, we got not even the judges examining witnesses in secret. We didn't get disclosure of anything. I knew from doing the other cases that we could have had a fairer process, and we didn't get it from the federal court. It just got worse. In 2002, the government passed all cases to the federal court, not just non-permanent residents, but permanent resident cases, so no one had a fair hearing. It wasn't until it went to the Supreme Court of Canada in Charkaoui, and the Supreme Court, in fact, had refused leave on the same issue in Ahani back in 1992 when this first came up, how unfair the process was. So in 2007, the Supreme Court finally decided to hear the issue. This is after men had been detained year after year in horrible conditions. They finally decided to hear the case and decided that what we had at the Security Intelligence Review Committee back in 1984 was a fairer process, that there should be some disclosure and special advocates to be able to test the evidence in secret. The government changed the law in 2002 to broaden the use of secret evidence to immigration deportation hearings, security certificate cases which already had it in federal court, and cases where you sponsor your wife or someone applies to immigrate to Canada, they turn it down, you go to federal court to review that refusal, they can present secret evidence before the court. So now there's a lot of different instances where secret evidence can be presented. I think that what the end result of all this is that in terms of the conclusions that I can draw from the experience that I've had representing people both from the 80s onward through to the present time. First, the federal court should not handle these cases. It is not a court that is used to the kind of fundamental fairness that's required in the criminal justice system. The cases should be before judges that deal with criminal justice issues, who are used to dealing with confidential informants, who are used to dealing with those kinds of issues. The reason I say the federal court shouldn't have it, they are better now under the new system because of the Charkaoui case, but you know what's telling? The federal court has a discretion on other cases not to appoint a special advocate when secret evidence is presented. I know of not a single case where they have appointed a special advocate in those instances where they have a discretion. They have always believed, wrongly and arrogantly,
that they could test the evidence without the help of anybody else. Well, guess what? They were being misled by the Canadian Security Intelligence Service for years in terms of the evidence. The example Leo gave of the polygraph test was a good example, that someone failed a polygraph and the court wasn't told about it. That's the kind of thing that was going on. So now, with the cases where they have a discretion, nobody gets a special advocate. It is not a court that's responsible in respect of ensuring that there is fairness, generally, in these kinds of instances. Secondly, I think that the court has been a party to the demonization and the lawful sanctioning of persecution of people. And I don't use the word persecution lightly, but I think what Sophie and what Mr. Majoub and what Mr. Jabala and Mr. Omri, 5 years in solitary detention, have suffered can be characterized as persecution. I would win a refugee case on the same facts for a person coming from Syria or Egypt. Even if they weren't physically tortured, the mistreatment is appalling and it's judicially sanctioned. Why they have to demonize these men, I don't know. Certainly with respect to anybody else who's been subject to a security certificate, there was a certain degree of demonization, but after September 11th, full force, the state is out there ensuring that people are mistreated in a lawful, civil kind of way. It's Hannah Arendt's The Banality of Evil. It is the banality of evil. You don't have someone using a torture rod on them, but it is persecution in terms of how they've been treated. The other thing that I've learned is I really truly think we do not need secret hearings. I was in court today on Mr. Jabala's case, and one of the issues was the government wants to put in evidence now that memos had been sent to the RCMP. This is evidence that was disclosed to us some time ago, some of it. Some evidence wasn't disclosed to us, but they left out the fact that the RCMP had received it. Now they want to put it in because it helps them to show the court that they had told the RCMP about this information. They play games with national security claims. All of a sudden, what they withheld for years, and this is 12, 13, 14, 15 years, they withheld this information. It becomes useful to them, and suddenly there's no longer a national security issue. In Mr. Omri's case and other cases I've been involved in, there will be evidence that's not disclosed in one proceeding and is disclosed in another. And yet even in the proceeding where it's not disclosed, although we got it in the other proceeding, like a detention review or something back when they had different procedures, we're still not allowed to have it. It is a joke. In the criminal justice system, they use confidential informants. They manage to ensure that a person has a fair process without knowing the identity of the informant. They can do that. They don't need to have a secret hearing. I think when you put what's happened in these cases with the fact that the federal court has allowed the government to get away with not disclosing evidence that they ought to have disclosed and could have disclosed, it's just an unfair system, and it shouldn't exist. I don't think that means, at the end of the day, that you don't offer alternatives to the court, which is what we did when we argued Charkaoui. We argued the special advocates was an alternative process, because those kinds of secret proceedings have been there for a long time, and it's going to take a long time to get our courts to see that it's fundamentally overall unfair to have them. And I think what I will do, oh yeah, the last point that I want to say about it is that once you start into this process where you have secret evidence, it just delays the proceedings. I mean, Mr. Majoub's case is not finished. Mr. Harkat's has gone back. Mr. Jabala's isn't finished. For Mr. Jabala, take him as an example. First certificate 1999, he won. Second certificate 2001 on the same evidence. It was finished in 2005. He lost. It got quashed. It went back. He lost again. It got quashed because of Charkaoui, the first Charkaoui judgment. They started again in February of 2008. We're now almost at the end of 2012. We haven't completed the reasonableness hearing. It's just too long. You don't hold someone under legal proceedings under these kinds of conditions and in detention for so many years and call it a fair process. I mean, it's destroyed the lives of his wife and children. It's destroyed Mr. Majoub's life. It's destroyed Sophie's life. It's just, as soon as you've got the secret evidence, you've got a real problem in terms of providing a fair hearing, and it just doesn't proceed. And then the very last thing is that these cases are 3 security certificate cases still outstanding, hundreds and hundreds of people accused of being terrorists in the other process, the other secret process before the Immigration Division members. Those people are equally wallowing in the same kind of mistreatment. It's just not on the public radar because it's not in the press. But those people, for this, you might say these cases will end and that's the end of the problem. It is not. They've created an octopus, and believe me, for my one Mr. Jabala's case that I'm representing on a security certificate, I have an office full, dozens of people who are facing secret hearings in another context before people who aren't even judges and certainly are not fair in the way that they handle the cases. Less time because Sophie took more.
Thank you, everybody here. I am glad to be here around you, to share my ordeal with you. And I'm proud to be between those lawyers who is brilliant in this matter, which I'm not going to speak about detention or anything else. I have certain area I would like to focus on it. Maybe most of you agree or disagree, but here I'm here to represent myself, to express myself about what's going on with me, with others as well. First of all, my name is Mohammed Mahjoub. I'm originally from Egypt. I've been detained since 2000 until today. I spent 8 years in detention, 7 of them or 6 of them at Metro's detention. Then they transferred me to concentration camp at Kingston Immigration Holding Center, they call it. I called it concentration camp. Hitler, for instance, he built a concentration camp for Jews. Same thing built for us here. There is no difference at all whatsoever. I call this camp, this concentration camp for Muslims, because we was 5 Muslim men. Nobody else was us, and it built for us. However, I spent also 3 years in solitary confinement at Metro West Detention Center. They transferred me from there, from Metro West to concentration camp at Millhaven by a special jet from RCMB. And this has cost a lot of money. However, I'm political prisoner here in Canada. My case is a political case that is not legal one. Until this moment, the government of Canada didn't charge me or didn't give me fair trial. The whole thing is going on. It's fraud, in my opinion. They lie to us. They lie to their own citizens. They spent, in my opinion, minimum in those cases, only 5 cases, over $1 billion. Also to let you know, I am a Muslim. I'm proud of myself. I have a long beard. I practice my belief. I'm proud of myself, and each one of you should be proud of himself or herself as well. The 3 areas I would like to take you to, first of all, I would like to make chronology about CSIS in my case. The second issue is, who is the terrorist? Is me or some Canadian official and Egyptian as well? This is the second point. The third point, the outcome of the revolution in Egypt in 2011. I would like to start, first of all, how I became interested, or how CSIS became interested to me. There is one of the 5 security certificate cases, individual, his phone was tapped, and he mentioned my name only in November 1996, because his phone was tapped. Since then, they became interested at me. A year and a half later, 3 of my brothers got arrested. They spent 8 years in a prison, torture, because of the hand of Caesar. And I'm saying out loud, the hand of Caesar is full of blood of my brothers who was tortured and bloody under their torture in Egypt because of Caesar. Caesar, their hand is full of blood of my brothers. And Egyptian arrested my brothers on behalf of Caesar and the government of Canada, and the government of Canada arrested me on behalf of Hosni Mubarak, because Hosni Mubarak is the most one in the Middle East back up the US and other Western society. We have to be clear. There's no need to hide anything. I'm not scared from anybody. The only one I fear is Allah. My life in His hand, and I'm proud of that. What happened is, they sharing information, then my brothers got arrested. Also, they interrogate my brothers. They got information from my brothers. They got information from other individuals. And so on. Caesar rely on this information. Later on, after a few years, after my brother got arrested, I was free here in Canada, by the way. I arrested in 2000. Since then, I'm in detention, between detention and house arrest, and I am in house arrest right at this moment. And this gentleman, Mr. Lumley, he's one of my supervisor surety. He always helped me, and thank him so much. Caesar, they tried their best to use my wife behind my back before we got divorced because of Caesar and CBS as well. And this is the downside of my detention and my house arrest. My family couldn't handle it anymore. Caesar interrogated me many times. They said, oh, we collect information. They are a liar. They interrogated me. They rely on this information. How come they collect information, they didn't use it in court? They use it in court. They are a liar. The head of Caesar lied in court. The head of Caesar, all of them in my opinion, are liars completely. There is many evidence in my case. They lied, they mislead the court. Even Jim Judd, who is the head of Caesar, wrote a memo to a guy, his name is Stockwell Day, who testified in my case last month. Also, Stockwell Day, with respect to him, is a liar. I have to be straightforward. I am sick and tired about what's going on with us in secret evidence, and I will show you how much they lie to themselves, to the court, to the public, and so on and so forth. Caesar, when Dr. Ali Hindi and all of you, maybe you heard this man's name, he testified in my case. They sent information to Egypt to detain him, which they did. And Egyptian authorities told him this is the request from Caesar. Okay? This is the request from Caesar. He was lucky because his dad is a judge in Egypt, and he has a strong connection with the previous regime. That's why he got out of detention. And they threatened him, don't tell Mahjoub and Jaballa or anybody else. You have to work with us. And all of you are aware of what they call rendition program. Canada, as well, is involved deeply. And here is the example. Madame Mosé, Mr. Maher Harab, he detained in the United States. He deported to Syria. He tortured for a year. Why? Because Canada involved in rendition program. This rendition program is created in 1995 between Egypt and the United States. Then it was applied to every individual or every country after the event of 9/11. Caesar rely on information obtained under torture, which is very clear in my case, in particular in my case, because there is a court order. It said the bulk of information in Mahjoub's case based on information obtained under torture. They rely on information, destruction of evidence, which Ms. Harakat's wife mentioned. And Mr. Harakat won this case. And it is applied in my case as well. That's why a judge in my case excluded many things in my case related to this issue. And so on and so forth. What else CSIS is doing? CSIS is, they destroy their own country. They destroy their own loyalty to their own country. There is no need to lie. If somebody commit a crime, there is a law applied to every individual. Every individual in this universe are innocent until proven guilty. But in our case, it's completely upside down. What is the justice here? What is the law? There is no law in first place with respect to the Canadian. I lost complete confidence in the legal system in Canada. There is no right to detain someone without showing him and his lawyer evidence. How can I defend myself? How can I defend myself and others can defend themselves? Or how can my lawyer defend the client? It's a crime. Honestly, I'm sick and tired. You can't feel the pain I feel. Because I'm innocent. And somebody asks me, you have to say you are innocent. No, I'm not going to say I'm innocent. If I'm not innocent, why the government didn't charge me in first place? Why should I say I'm innocent? My hand is more clean and clear than the hand of CSIS and CPSA when it comes to crime. My hand is more clean than their hand. I'm willing to challenge all of them, from the head of CSIS, even from the head of the state as well. Because we are human. Every individual has a right to live. If I commit a crime, put me in a trial. It's very simple demand. I'm not going to take your time because it's more over 12 years. It is hard to describe what I went through. But the second issue, I would like to discuss it with you. They call me I'm a terrorist. Who is the terrorist in first place? Is me or some of the Canadian officials? I have to be very specific. Who is the real terrorist? I didn't terrorize any individual, whether in Canada or abroad. I didn't commit a crime here in Canada or anywhere else. Why they call me a terrorist for 12 years? Why they label me as a terrorist? Here what happened to me, for instance. When I went to detention, they tried to assault me. To try to sexual assaulted me. I was naked, like when I wore like my mom, and he tried to sexual assault me. This individual, he's a terrorist. He's a Canadian official terrorist. Also, when they threatened to kill me in detention, several times, who is the terrorist here? The Canadian official. It's very simple. They threatened to kill me and they said, you are a fucking Muslim terrorist. You should be killed. People like you should be killed. Who is the terrorist here? Is me or the Canadian official? Of course, the Canadian official. I have to say it out loud. Doesn't matter what's going to cost me. Also, they threatened me again to kill me and to kill all Muslims. They said all Muslims are terrorists, are fucking Muslim terrorists. They should be killed and they should be buried alive. And they still are, those individuals, they still free. But if I say it to them, they will give me minimum 25 years in prison. Because they are a human. But we are not a human. No. I am a human, I am a Muslim, I'm proud of myself. One day, they took me from detention to hospital. One of the staff asked me, who is your lawyer? I said, Ms. Jackman and Mr. John Norris. Just guess what they said to me. Those fucking lawyers corrupt this country. Mr. Barb, Miss Barb is sitting beside me. They say it. And this is the first time for her to hear what I'm saying now. They say it. Those individuals will run the country. You have to think who runs the country. If the right person, we will be more than happy. But if the wrong person, he or she should go away. One of the CSIS staff tried to assault my religion. She said, I can insult your religion, your Lord, your Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. I said, please, you can insult me. There is no need to insult my religion or anything else. Who is the terrorist here, for instance? Is me or somebody tied my little two kids in a car in summertime for 2 hours. Then they came to the hospital when my wife was in miscarriage. In the hospital, they tied my kids in the summertime in a car for 2 hours. Then they came to the hospital, they threatened the hospital to shut down the hospital completely. If I didn't get out of the... Which I called them, they said, Majub, go with your wife. What is the justice here? Who is the terrorist? Who is the terrorist, guys? You know what I mean? It is a long story. Anyway, also, one day I went with Mr. Lovely, and he is eyewitness, to retain one of my current lawyer, which is Mr. Paul Slaneski. It was in April 2011. I have to write out a request form for the whole information. Nobody is aware of this issue at all except 2 organizations, CSIS and CDSA. Then when I arrived there, 10 minutes later, what happened? 10 police officers with machine gun, laser gun, black uniform. Somebody called us, there is a man with a long beard with a machine gun come to this unit. This unit is in the 2nd floor, it is not the 1st floor. Who told them this information? They call Crime Stopper. And this man was eyewitness. I'm not exaggerating anything. Something come to my mind very quick because it's a short time to give my word to speak. But anyway, also there is one interesting issue. There is Intrax letter. Somebody sent it to the immigration minister in 2001. A month before my court hearing. We never heard about this issue until recently, a few months ago. And we found out somebody sent this letter threatening the government of Canada, in particular the immigration minister, to release me because I belong to some organization, which is a lie. It's a lie. You know how much money it costs them in 2 days? I made estimation between $10 to $12 million in 2 days because they evacuate 2 buildings. It has over 2,000 individuals. They pay them and so on. They took the Intrax letter, transferred it to a lab and so. Why? Why is this for? And there is many issues. Sorry, I come to end my talk with you, which is the 3rd point, the outcome of revolution of Egypt. They accuse me I'm 2nd in command in organizations called VOC, which Vanguard of Conquest in Egypt, which does not exist in first place. And I would like to show you, here I wrote those cases. 1, 2, 3, and 4. None of them, my name mentioned on it, from Egypt. Directly or indirectly, they are a liar. The government of Canada and CSIS are liars. They misled.
Excuse me, just maybe you correct me if I'm wrong, but I this Vanguard of Conquest, it was kind of a creation by Hosni Mubarak.
Yes, that's correct.
To please the West.
You are
create some threat of Islam.
you are absolutely right.
And now it's out after what happened.
It's here.
And those are the proceedings in Egypt.
In Egypt.
Against
This-
others, and you're not named at all.
No, this is in Arabic. It is not translated yet. Just received it recently.
And
This
they're
is what.
free, those guys.
Yeah, all of them, by the way, all of them are free. And one of them, he testified last month. He is a lawyer. He testified in my case for 5 days. He spent 20 years in a prison. His name is here. He testified last month in my case. He is free, he is a lawyer. Okay? He said, guys, everything is fabrication, which is true. If you put somebody under severe torture, what do you think? What do you think I have to please a guy who tortured me? Whatever. This is one incident. The second incident, by the way, there is a accused person or co-accused in the same case. His name is Ahmed Agiza. Ahmed Agiza was in Sweden. He deported to Egypt by CIA and Swedish authority. Then he got out of detention recently. Right now, he became a citizen in Sweden.
Sweden took him back
Sweden accepted him back.
after they rendered him to torture.
Okay? Just to show you who is your government, who is Jesus. This is another example. The third.
We can discuss this later. I don't want to interrupt. I know
absolutely.
you have a very important story,
Absolutely.
but I think we need to hear something about. And then maybe if people are interested, they can ask you a question. I think that's very important.
Thank you.
Run
Just 1 minute.
Okay,
1 minute, please. There is another minute or another evidence here. Hosni Mubarak himself. I'm showing you evidence. I'm not speaking out of my mind. If you can see, Hosni Mubarak himself involved killing the previous president of Egypt, which is Anwar Sadat, in 1981. Here is the evidence, guys. Here is the evidence. I have a plenty of evidence here, but because of the shortness of time, I can't discuss it. If you have any question, please feel free. Thank you so much for having me today.
Well, sorry to interrupt you. I think we need to do that, but I know Yamar will be the last one to speak, and we are really running out of time. So hello?
Use your loud
Yeah.
voice for a few minutes.
There is no conspiracy against lawyers here, but it seems that they got a very short time, and then security expert or person is about the longest time.
But that's as it should be.
Exactly. This is what I really I wanted to emphasize because we really need to hear from them, and the suffering coming from their mouth and from their words, it's so eloquent. And it doesn't mean that we don't really need to hear from the lawyers, but I think their work will kind of shed some light to the process itself. So if so, we are going to end with Yabar Hamid, and then so please keep it very briefly, and then afterwards people can ask a question to any of the panelists.
Or alternatively, I can just leave it open for questions.
Would you like to do that?
That's fine.
Sure.
I know the one thing that I will say, because I had some comments prepared, and I don't need to speak again because I was at another conference this morning in Toronto where the Special Rapporteur on Counterterrorism, Van Emerson, was speaking, who came, and one would imagine that the Special Rapporteur on Counterterrorism would have something to say about sort of the most egregious cases, the worst human rights violators. He was speaking about Canada. You speaking about Mr. Majoub's case, he was very concerned about the abuses that are happening in Mr. Majoub's case, and he's going to follow up with that. And that's, in a sense, it's great that the United Nations is taking note, but it's horrific that the Special Rapporteur has its focus here on Canada. So the one thing that I will agree with, and I'll agree with what Mr. Majoub has said, but his is a political case. He is a political prisoner, and what he says and the impact that he felt from his comments rings true, because he is suffering through this whole process that has been going on in litigation for years and years and years. This is his life being frittered away, and there's many more things that can be said, but we could actually speak all day and all night about how deficient this process is, but you guys probably have a lot of questions, and we're happy to answer.
Thank you so much, Gabar. I think
Well, thank you for all the panelists. I think we got a very nice range and mixture of between legal opinion and plus personal stories here. And I would like you to open the floor to questions. And if you have any question about the process itself, because I think that was not very well maybe discussed. I mean, I know Leo mentioned that, but he kept it a little bit, he was very disciplined, he kept it on time, so I don't mean anything, so but yeah, please feel free to ask, because I think I wanted to say something while hearing Mr. Majoub and while hearing Sophie. Something that came out of their testimony is that many Canadians are not aware of this. And you tell them the story and they won't believe you. And I think maybe if it didn't happen to my husband, and I know that he didn't suffer as much as they did. I mean, it's different, and we are not here going to compare like the scale of suffering. I think suffering is suffering. However, knowing this, we always think that the evil is the other, it's outside, but this is happening here. And it's not because Mr. Harkat, is not a Canadian citizen. It's not because Mr. Majoub. They are human beings. And today I was in a ceremony this morning about women and about a person's case, the famous 5. And it was all that fight was about whether women are human beings or not. Well, I think it's so interesting to have today a debate of of refugees and still considering them as not human beings. I think they are human beings, whether they are citizens or not. This is not the matter. They have constitutional rights, and these rights are very clearly here violated. And we are watching this with our own eyes, and it's so frustrating that not a lot of people are aware of this, but you are aware now. You've heard of that, and I think you can make a difference. So please don't be shy or embarrassed to ask a question, because it's your chance this evening. And I'm sure you are very lucky, very, very lucky. One day you are going to get out of here, and lucky in a way to know, because knowledge is now more money. It's really something important, and not a lot of lawyers are aware of these issues.
Can I just say something before we move to the question? There is a petition here against security certificates that I would like to pass around before some of you leave. These petitions are tabled by Elizabeth May. And so we will add them online. We have over 5,000 people that signed this petition. Some very high-profile Canadians signed this. All the major unions have endorsed it. All the groups and organizations. We have some MPs on this list. So if you don't mind, I'll pass this around for people to sign. And I'd like to say this is the first time that I've actually had the pleasure to share a panel with Mr. Majoub, and I think he kicks some ass, personally. I've never heard, I don't think anybody tell the truth. This is the first time I actually hear that, you know, somebody has the guts to speak the truth, and I applaud Mr. Majoub for that.
I have one question. This is for the lawyers. Do you believe that the security certificate regime should be abolished entirely, or can it be amended further? So we can go through the panel.
Leo, you better say abolished.
Well, I think I pretty much answered as much in my comments. I really think the track record of the security certificate regime is one that shows that it's not capable of respecting the charter rights of detainees. And I think Barb put it exceptionally well when she talked about the role of secret evidence or lack thereof in a trial. I think it really has no place in a trial. That it should be national security bending over backwards to meet the needs of the justice system rather than the other way around. And my experience, and I think one of the biggest observations that I've made having worked on this case, is that it seems like the justice system, since 9/11 in particular, has been trying to bend over backwards to accommodate national security. And that really bothers me, because it's based on this fear, which is very often inflated by the government. And national security doesn't always fit well within a legal construct because of the nature of intelligence, which is often not evidence at all, because it's secretive, and because it's fundamentally unaccountable. And the way I see it, we should stop bending over backwards to accommodate national security. There's a reason why rights are what they are. They're stationary. They shouldn't be bending to the will of national security.
I won't take long. I already think I made it clear. The one thing I think I've come to from all these years is that this is not necessary. It's not necessary. It's unfair. We've had a criminal justice system for as long as we've been a country, and it manages to provide fair trial process without secrecy.
Can I just add something? I'm not a lawyer, but I've attended obviously every day in court for the past couple of years. And in court, they keep saying, for example, when Matt gets up for an argument, they'll say, this is not a criminal trial, because we hired criminal lawyers and we have immigration lawyers, but we're treated, these men are treated worse than criminals. And immigration lawyers, well, they're not there to fight those kind of laws either. So who is the proper person to defend you in a secretive court?
You're saying we're not real lawyers.
Damn lawyers, Barbara, damn lawyers.
I think it's a good question, a sort of logical question given the form that we're in. Like, why do we even have these to begin with? And it's something that we talk about all of the deficiencies in the process, but there's just this fundamental nagging question: why does it still exist if there's all these problems? And it's a question that was raised this morning in our other panel, and I'm cribbing because I'm taking someone else's answer, but it was posed to our special advocate, Neil Kapoor, who was on the panel, and he gave a decent answer, and he said it's unfair, it's unjust, the system is what it is, and this is how it works, and as a special advocate, this is what we do. But he says, you know, it is unfair. Audrey Macklin, who was moderating, made an interesting point that if you think about it from a perspective of necessity, on the one hand, Anil argued that, you know, the sovereign of the state is going to want to control its borders, and that's paramount. That's what happens, and that's what the state is all about. It's controlling who leaves, who enters. But that question is not necessarily subsumed with the risk and danger and that determination, which can be made on par with all the rights and procedures that we have in the criminal law. And what we've done is we've conflated these questions so that the control of borders now becomes mixed in with the question of danger. And so the very point that Sophie was raising is something we confront every time we argue a detention review, where we have you know, people who have committed homicide, egregious crimes, who are released on bail conditions and who actually served their time, could be, you know, 10 years, and then they're actually released. Whereas in Mr. Majoub's case, and the other cases, you're never released. And we're supposed to somehow square that within fairness in the law. We can't. It's artificial and it's a construct, but it sort of, the injustice stems from the fact that we can ignore, I think what Mooney was talking about, this basic humanity that everyone should be entitled to, and by virtue of that, recognizing due process and fairness because a person is a human being.
Any more questions?
I just want to add that we have a criminal justice system in place where you're supposed to put the evidence out on the table for everyone to see. I think as much you would like to see the evidence as we do, so we can all question it and all that. And it doesn't matter, like these men, if they're put on the stand to testify, their credibility is always in question. They're lying. They're lying. It doesn't matter. My husband, the first line he said was a lie, according to the judge, based on the secret evidence. But the secret informants and the CSIS agents, their credibility is never put on the stand, not even in secret proceedings. I'm sorry, that's bullshit. Everybody here should have the right to see the damn evidence and question what your government is doing. We all need to put our foot down and say, this does not belong to the democratic society of Canada.
Any more questions? Yes.
So, I know this is probably going to be a little bit more for like student questions coming from law students, but around the procedures and all that. But as somebody who's not so familiar with the law necessarily, or the typical procedures around it, is there something else that needs to be done here outside of that realm? Is there some kind of mobilizing that needs to be done in society broadly, or on this campus in particular, for example, or amongst youth in particular, that we should be doing here as student associations, as individual students, to really mobilize around issues of injustice by our government, around issues of security certificates and other things. But what is that? Is that something that, for example, the people who are going through this, Mr. Majub and others, their families and their representatives, is that something that you want? And if so, how would that look?
Let me just, before you can answer, there is here a sign-up sheet that was given to me by one supporter of Mr. Majub, and if people are interested, because that answered a little bit your question, you can put your name, email, and maybe get information about what's going on and how you can help. So that's just here, and I think also Mr. He has another copy. So please, if you are,
I'll put it at the back.
yeah, if you are interested, please feel free to come and write your name so we can inform you about anything happening with the case of Mr. And Sophie also just passed around the petition so that you can sign as well.
Just wanted to add, there is a support group for this issue. There are people from Montreal and Toronto and other places, and we have a growing list of people, and we send out news. We have a list that we send out news about what's happening. And so please do sign up on, you have one of the sheets, and I just sent one that you can. If you want to follow it, you can. And we're even meeting tomorrow night when we get home with our support group to plan strategy for the future.
Sorry, I have a few things to say regarding that question. Number one, I've been fighting for 10 years. I've been public for 10 years. I came out 10 years ago, I organized my own press conference, and I started my own committee. Number one, signed the petition, pass it on to your friends online. I have postcards in my bag here if you would like to send a postcard to Stephen Harper to abolish the process. This year is our 10th anniversary. We'll be doing some lobbying on the Hill, and we'll have some events around that. Speak to your groups, speak to your classes, invite us to speak to various groups. We'll be more than welcome to do that. Join our group. We always need volunteers. The HARCAP committee meets every 2 weeks, and we need some fresh blood in there to help us organize events. But I've been working my ass off for 10 years, no doubt about it. And I'm so glad Mr. Majub has been speaking out since his conditions have been loosened, I can say, I guess, because he's still going through some really, really tough time, and so is my husband, and it's ridiculous that we still have to live like that, even though they've never been charged and all that. But Mr. Majub hasn't even mentioned anything about his conditions, but All the 5 men were issued the toughest conditions in Canadian history and probably in the world. Like, compared to some countries that are going through similar sort of situations. I was in the UK a couple of years ago and I did this TV show on the Muslim stations, and there were a lot of Algerians in the UK going through similar situations, and they were calling the show, and they had very strict conditions, but not even close to what we had to. And I'm telling you, when I went to London 5 years ago, it was the first time that I had freedom in such a long time. I was around cell phones, I could talk to anybody, I didn't have a curfew. I was like totally lost. Nobody knew where I was half the time because I was like free like a bird. Like, I did everything in 5 days I was there. Like, I didn't stop because I would just appreciate my freedom. And as much as I enjoy having Mr. Majoub here, he's got some of his freedom back. It took him a lot to get him here. It took us a lot, and my husband, he can't be around. And the reality is these 2 men should be able to be in the same room and discuss this situation and be able to, you know what I mean, fight for justice. But there's restrictions, like I said. We live in constant fear, constant threat. Every day we're like, ooh, thinking, our heads are like, all the time, we'll breach a condition, what will happen, what's next. You never know what's going to happen in our case. Never.
I'll tell you a funny story. They do use the association against them. I represented Mr. Suresh, a Tamil from Sri Lanka, who was put in the same jail as Mr. Ohani, who was from Iran. It showed up in the allegations against them that they knew each other.
Like I usually start my talk by saying, now you guys are all associated to us. So good luck next time you cross the border.
Can I add something to that as well? It obviously, from our side of the table, it means a lot to have supporters in court and people that are familiar with what's going on. It's absolutely invaluable just as a motivator. But just something else as well. And I don't think it really needs to be said, but it's still important that awareness and resistance to government that is very keen on taking what it can get. Awareness is fundamental to that, because a lot of, for example, the laws with respect to the Anti-Terror Act were already being contemplated before 9/11, and it took very little time for the government to pass those changes after 9/11 happened. It sounds kind of cliche, but the government takes what it can get. And so when you have a complacent public, that's what happens. And in the wake of 9/11, we all know that the public at large was far more accepting of erosions of civil liberties in return for security. And so that's a tool the government has which can only be fought by awareness and resistance. And the perfect example to me is what happened with this internet surveillance bill. It really shows the power of social media and awareness and pushing back on the part of citizens and others, that when it came out that the government was going to implement these changes to allow them to institute these surveillance measures on internet, that the citizens, that people pushed back, and it actually managed to kill the bill, which is just amazing. I think it's one of the stories of the year when it comes to this kind of these kinds of campaigns. It was truly remarkable, and that's really what the ideal standard is.
I just want to add to what Leo said. He's absolutely right about attending court. For example, we're waiting to hear from the Supreme Court if they will hear our appeal a second time. We're going back in front of the Supreme Court on the constitutionality issue, and the government is also appealing on the question of protecting informants and making sure the destruction of evidence can be used within these cases. So next time you hear that we're in the Supreme Court, fill up the room. Last time we filled up 3 rooms full. And we won the Supreme Court, and I know we can win it again. And to answer that question as well, when I hired a lawyer back in 2004, it was very difficult. There was not that many lawyers that were taking on these cases. The paperwork on these cases, we're talking hundreds and thousands of pages. They have a room in their office that's just boxes full of hardcat stuff. Thousands and thousands and thousands of pages. And when I contacted the lawyer, I said, when I was looking for a new lawyer, I said, do you know who I am? They said, of course we know who you are. One, because I fought publicly and because the other guys are fighting, but it's a 50-50 thing. If you don't have the groups fighting for this, then the lawyers cannot do their job properly, and vice versa. We're not as strong if we don't have them on our side, and we kind of like, we work really well together, and we need both to be able to be successful, I think.
Okay, one more question. Okay, two more questions, and I think we have to just wrap up. Please go ahead.
My question is actually about Jackman governance.
Can you please raise up your voice?
One of the things I disagreed with most was that the fact that the special advocate was denied leave to cross-examine the informant. I'm wondering whether you believe that there should still be a system in place to protect informants so real issues of national concern will come out through whistleblowing, and what you believe should be in place instead of the security process.
Just to keep my answer short, I don't see why it should be any different than a criminal process. If the government chooses to rely on an informant, they should have to call that informant to the stand. Because on the other hand, when it comes to informants, we've had several commissions of inquiry with respect to wrongful convictions that show that these are very dangerous types of witnesses who are known to lie and are probably single-handedly responsible for several wrongful convictions. So it's no different in the national security context. The need for informants is no higher in national security than it is in law enforcement. So there's no reason why they shouldn't be forced to call that witness to the stand, and it's all the more egregious when they don't do so when it's a secret hearing where security cleared special advocates are denied that right.
And the other thing is that the media doesn't cover these witnesses, so-called witnesses, that most of them come from your communities that are within your own communities, especially the mosques. They span their communities. They get paid thousands of dollars for providing information that's what falls.
No, but also they get promised
Yeah.
landing.
Yeah.
That's what we know CSIS does. They go around in the community and meet different people and say, you want to be landed, inform. Otherwise, we're going to treat it out.
There is a very interesting story on McLean magazine about informants who worked.
Yeah, there is very interesting, if you want to read about informants, and it happened in Canada. Not a lot of people, again, heard about it. An informant in Canada who got, I think, $4 million. And when there is someone who was wrongfully convicted and then compensated later on, there is an outcry of how the tax money payers are going, but at the same time, we pay $4 million to informants for to accuse people who are not, we are not even sure whether these people are really wrong, like criminals or accused of anything. And it happened in Canada, and they got, I think it's in McLean magazine, I'm not sure about the year, it's maybe 2 years ago, around 2009 or 10, but you can find that. And it's a very interesting story to read, and yeah, to tell you about the how Canada give protection to these people, and how, on the other hand, they can ruin people's life as well.
May I add just one point very quick? There is a case about Ahmed Rassam, and all of you heard his name. He was in Canada here, and he detained in the United States. There is two individuals from CSIS testified in his case. One is Teddy Flanagan. At the time, he was a high-profile individual in CSIS, and he testified based on information. What's it called? Sorry, based on information obtained under, not under torture, under tapping his phone, and they deduct his conversation. They make it in summary form. Then the other individual from CSIS testified here from Canada, and the judge in the United States reject their testimony based the communication analyst refused to give his last name and to show up over there. He said, we are not going to accept you as a witness. It does not work this way. You have to come to court to testify. We would like to see you, how you act, how you respond to our...
It will be crucial for the Supreme Court to hear this issue about how far do we go to protect informants, because as of now, The informants have actually nothing to lose by providing information, except we have everything to lose.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Another question?
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak and to educate us more on this. I can't help but thinking to Majid that in another context, in another time, in another setting, that could have been me in your situation. So I hope more people get to actually hear your story. There are many stories. Many of us are experiencing this right now. So really quickly, thinking since 9/11, the word terrorism has been imprinted with cultural, religious, and racial prejudices. And this has really narrowed our understanding and vision of terrorism. Mr. Majid, you asked the question, who is the terrorist? And you brought up, great examples of that. And I really think that, since 9/11, our vision of who is a terrorist has really been narrowed based on stereotypes, prejudices, and just hatred. So my question is, how long, and for the legal experts as well, how long do you think, in your opinion, what would it take for that imprint to be removed, not just from a societal perspective, but in the way we craft our policies regarding immigration and anti-terrorist laws? Kind of a big question, but I hope it's clear.
Thank you. Can you hear that?
Some thoughts. I think that the term terrorist and terrorism is broadly encompassing, and the thing that we understand to be the terrorist, I think, as you were referring to, is the individual violent dissident against the state. And there are various kinds of terrorism. There's state terrorism. There's other kinds of politically, religiously motivated terrorism. There's different categories. But with respect to the notion of the violent dissident, this is something that, in political terms, has been magnified, particularly since 9/11, but not exclusively, because it gets traction. It gets traction in society, and one of the points that was raised earlier is that where there is a more complacent, apathetic public, when we're not kind of questioning and getting behind what is the nature of this allegation of terrorism? Why is this person being branded a terrorist? And is the quality of that wrongdoing as a terrorist as opposed to another offender, person charged under the criminal code? Does that make it more blameworthy or more serious? And I think part of that is the political context, and to undo it in part, not exclusively, in part, we're doing that in court, because as we go through that and keep shaping the foundations of this process, we show it to be bereft of any substance. And so it gets eroded until ultimately, either like in the Charkaoui case, the certificate is pulled. We show that how can one person, as in the instance of Mr. Charkaoui, have tremendous, as Sophie was saying, some of the most stringent bail conditions in the history of Canadian jurisprudence, and be free the next day? It doesn't make sense. And I think those kinds of disjunctures, we can push them through the legal process, but simultaneously, in terms of what we do publicly and otherwise, we can continue to question them. So it's a large political question, but I think that the roots of it are what has affinity in the broader public. Do we believe in that concept of the terrorist? And I think part of this conversation is undoing that. It's not a very exact answer to your question, but I think it's a process.
And I don't think it's just related to undoing the concept of terrorism. I think it's our concept of ourselves. I really think that what this show has shown me in terms of the treatment of these men over the years is that it is evil. It's cruel, it's inhumane, it's treatment that's been imposed by people who have backyard barbecues just like we do. who don't, start slashing people and making them scream from pain, but who slowly, through this kind of state interference with their privacy over an extended period of time, not torture, but persecute them. I mean, I don't want someone going to court telling the judge to call them torturers. In any event, I think it's persecutory in nature. But when you think of it, if you look at places like Guantanamo, the United States is no different than the Mubarak regime. What we've done to people is really no different either. It's a difference in degree. And we've got to recognize, the best example I can give, I was in Chile after the coup, and the lawyers there were horrified because habeas corpus went out the window 2 days after the military coup. But they were lawyers and judges who had been appointed under a democracy, just like us, who had lived under a democracy. The conditions in the country changed, and these guys, the judges that were democratically appointed and studied law under democracy, all of a sudden were no different than the judges in Nazi Germany, who'd also studied under a form of democracy. It can switch. You've got to understand that we've got that kind of evil in our society, in ourselves, and that it's there. And if you don't stop it, like that's why I was so mad at the Supreme Court of Canada in the Charkaoui case. We argued that Hassan Omre's 5 years of solitary detention, solitary confinement, which wasn't necessary, and continued detention without review, was cruel treatment. He'd already been subject to it. And the Supreme Court said, well, now we're going to give you detention reviews every 6 months, so it's all right. Well, sorry, it's not all right. It really isn't all right to keep someone in solitary confinement for 5 years in a country that calls itself a democracy. But our courts, I don't think, can get a handle on the fact that when they do it, it doesn't make it right. If Mubarak's government does it, it's not right. If they do it in Syria, it's not right. If we do it in Canada, it's not right. And that's what we have to come to terms with, is that it's not right here. It requires that we look at ourselves differently.
Can I just make a quick comment on that? I will say what Barbara said. I will say the opposite of what Barbara said. I think it's cruel. What they're doing is torture. It's mental abuse that they're doing. They've been torturing us for years. But I just want to make an observation, like the CBSA officers, many times, I don't know if they've said it to the others, they say, we're just doing our jobs here. We're just, we're in a situation, they're border agents. They're not meant to watch people like Mr. Majoub and my husband. It's not part of their probably mandate, but the Federal Court of Appeal gave it to them. Well, I'm sorry. You're wearing the uniform. You're wearing the bulletproof vest. You carry the gun, and you follow me around. If you don't want to do it, and you think it's unacceptable, say, sorry, I don't want to do it. I don't want to be part of it. Because in my eyes, they are part of that large network of people that are responsible for that. I don't care how small your job is. You should say, I refuse to do this kind of job. You choose what you do in life, and you choose what, the harm that this will do. But every little person that's played a role in this has somewhat made it acceptable to have this kind of stuff in our society, in Canada.
Well, I have one suggestion is what we could do is, we have the room until 8 o'clock, but I know that we kept our tech support people for longer than we booked them for, and some of these still have to go. So what we'll do is, we have some leftover food as well, and a few of us can stick around as well. So if you want to come up to the speakers after, please feel free to do so, but I do just have to wrap up. Forgive me, I'm so sorry.
Thank you, sister.
So before I say thank you to our guests, I would like to thank all the Muslim Law Students Association execs and the volunteers who helped put this event together, as well as special thank you to Mary Foster and Sophie Arcad, who helped me organize this. And I also wanted to thank the Justice for Majoub Network, the CLSS, and the Dean's Conference Fund for helping sponsor this event. Without all of this help, this event would not have been possible. So thank you to them. I would also like to talk briefly about an initiative that has been started by a few inspiring people from Montreal. They're known as the Secret Trial 5 group, and they're a group of people who have been working on a documentary to raise awareness about security certificates and to really show the human aspect of it. A few years ago, they created a short film called Good Son, and it's available to watch free online on their website, www.secrettrial5.com. And it's based on the true story of how security certificate detainee Mahmoud Jabal's young son, I don't know how old he was at the time, maybe 9, he was made to translate for his father as CSIS officers interrogated him in their own home. The film is very emotional and a very stark look into the reality of the process, so I encourage you guys all to watch it. It's also won a number of awards and distinctions. In order to continue working on their feature-length documentary, the Secret Trial 5 has set up a crowdfunding campaign on their website, which accepts donations to help them along the way. In order to thank our distinguished panelists and our moderator, and to continue to raise awareness about this issue, the Muslim Law Students Association has donated an amount in each of our speakers' name to the Secret Trial 5. Thank you. To end, I just wanted to offer some words of encouragement to my law school colleagues and the other students who are here from other fields. As students, we have an abundant reserve of opportunity and strength at our disposal. With this, we should continue to question and challenge unconstitutional regimes such as this. So I urge you not to let this opportunity to remedy any injustice go to waste. Thank you, and assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you.
Thank you so much.
See you later, Sarah.
Yeah, contact me and grab a beer.
Good thing.
Sorry. Video.
Honestly, yeah. It's mind-boggling.
And they moved the trial. So everybody applied their trial.
Has been very badly mistreated.